happen. We were told by the then Prime Minister that he would send a letter announcing our decision immediately after the result, and under the treaty we expected to be out after 2 years, with or without agreements with the European Union. Instead, we find ourselves today having yet another debate after so many Groundhog Days in this place, same people rehearsing the same arguments, as around half the House of Commons, we'll find out whether it's more than half, are still trying to stop any kind of Brexit and are forcing those of us who believe in Brexit to dilute what we are trying to do and delay us enjoying the fruits of our Brexit vision. Now let us look at this agreement, because it is far from ideal from the point of view of a Leave voter. Now I'm delighted that the Prime Minister today reassured us that we will take back control of our fish completely and we will decide how that amazing resource is nurtured, looked after and used by our country, and that is very welcome. I also accept these documents show that we will not have to go into battle with our troops on a vote we have lost, and that we are not about to be sucked in to losing the sovereign control of our government and parliament over our foreign and defence policy. But we are still in trouble with the powers of the European Court of Justice over our laws, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend from Stone for contributing to the legislation, because there is now a sovereignty clause, and I hope it works, and that is a definite improvement. But I am extremely worried by the situation in Northern Ireland.
The honourable member for giving way. Does the honourable member not understand that, as a unionist point of view, we believe that our sovereignty has been removed by this agreement? That to be a unionist in Northern Ireland is very different to be a unionist in the United Kingdom and to be a unionist in the honourable member's constituency. And does he not feel that unionists have been overdone and have been duplicated and deceitful, and how this has been done forward?
I do not like the provisions on Northern Ireland for the reasons that he and his colleagues have set out, and I want the whole country to leave and Northern Ireland to be a full part of the United Kingdom under the same arrangements. And if there are any different arrangements, I certainly want there to be a consent mechanism that is suitable to the representatives from the DUP and the people they represent. And I'm also extremely worried in this set of proposals about the money. We never talk about the money. There are so many MPs who seem to think giving billions away to the European Union is just fine. Taking back control of our money was central to the campaign. Indeed, it was very contentious because people argued about exactly how much it was. But I don't think this has been properly quantified. The liabilities are potentially large and long-lasting, and there is no attempt in the agreement or the legislation to control it.
Grateful, my old friend. Could he give us his best estimate of what he thinks this bill could cost?
Well, we are told 39 billion, but I think it's a very low field estimate. I think it would be considerably more than that, and it will stretch many years into the future under some of the headings that we are providing for. But my worry is that the EU will be the main driver deciding what the bill is, because there isn't a satisfactory dispute resolution procedure, and the EU can levy the bill and say it's European law and that they know best what we should be paying. And so I think we have to be extremely careful, and I hope if the bill does make any progress tonight, and that's not looking very likely with some of the things people are saying, there will be considerable concentration in the committee stage on whether there are mechanisms for having better discipline over the money, because we voted to take back control of the money. I want some of that money for hospitals and schools and other public facilities in my constituency, and I would hope many other members of Parliament took the same view, and it would be very galling indeed if we find that we are technically out of the European Union but still paying them a great deal of money. So, Mr. Speaker, I approach this in a spirit of disappointment, but I think the Prime Minister was deeply damaged and undermined by the European Withdrawal No. 2 Act, which greatly reduced the bargaining leverage of the United Kingdom government, and I think people recognise that, and I do think it's a strange piece of legislation which might as well be renamed the Breaking of the Prime Minister's Promises Act, that is permissible, because surely we either have confidence in our government and the Prime Minister has to be able to keep his word, or we don't have confidence in our government collectively, in which case we can get a different government. And this Prime Minister has said he's going to take us out on October the 31st, has a lot of support for that in the country, and I hope we can find a way here to make that take place. And this Prime Minister said he would leave preferably with a deal, but if you can't get a decent deal, we will leave without a so-called deal. And they're my concluding remarks, that I think this language is totally misleading. There is no such thing as a no-deal Brexit. There is either leaving signing withdrawal agreement or leaving not signing withdrawal agreement. And were we to leave not signing the withdrawal agreement, there's an aviation agreement, haulage, customs arrangements, there's a government purchasing agreement, there is a general agreement on facilitation of trade through the WTO, and so you would have a managed WTO exit, which I think would work extremely well. I want to spend that money in Britain to promote growth and to promote a stronger economy. I want those free trade agreements, which I think we might be able to generate with the rest of the world. And I think if we just left, the EU would want to negotiate a free trade agreement with us, but all the time they think they have a chance of us not leaving. Of course, they're not going to offer anything or be positive about that because they think they might, from their point of view, do something better.
Thank you very much indeed. David Lammy.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, to just have a few moments to make a contribution to this important debate. I think it's now been 1,216 days since the referendum, and it's clear that all of us in this House are weary, fatigued, and some of us are certainly fed up with the Groundhog Day of constant debate about this subject. In my own constituency, just the weekend before last, two men were knifed within an inch of their lives. Whilst we were sitting in the debate on Saturday, I saw an email from a constituent who was complaining that his 10-year-old son had just been mugged. I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, I would so much prefer we were talking about the issue of law and order and crime in our country. This morning, the GP practice that served me and my family growing up in Tottenham for, most of my life has been described as inadequate by the inspectorate. Again, I wish we were discussing health in this chamber, not constantly returning to this issue. But as I reflect on where we are, and think also about very good colleagues and friends who are minded on this side of the House to vote for this bill, I think of what connects constituencies like mine and their constituencies in other parts of the country. And it is most certainly a degree of deprivation and poverty that we should have escaped from in our country by 2019, but is very real on our high streets when you look at the proliferation of betting shops, the abandoned shops, when you visit our estates, when you look at the prospects for too many of our young people.
Would you give way? When he refers to people feeling frustrated, bored and fatigued, does he agree with me that none of those things are an excuse for making what could be a very, very bad decision in haste, which is what the government is trying to make us do today?
David Lammy.
Absolutely right, I say to my right honourable friend. As much as this decision is one that needs to be taken, we should not make it in haste, and we should think very, very carefully about the implications for our country. Yes, I thank my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and like him, we have many issues in Coventry, particularly amongst young people with knife crime, and some instances more serious crimes than that. But would he not agree with me? I find it totally illogical that the government rejects the previous bill and expects us all to support a bill that makes people worse off. And people in Coventry and the West Midlands are concerned about their jobs, are concerned about funding universities.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and it brings me to the tenor of what I want to say. On the government's own estimates, we would see a reduction in GDP with a Canada-style free trade deal of 6.7% in our country. And when you just use a figure like that, it almost doesn't mean anything. But you see, in a constituency like, I won't give away, I'm going to make progress. In a constituency like Tottenham, it means everything. It means that the knife crime that I'm worried about could get considerably worse. I don't want the south side of Chicago in Tottenham. It means that the jobs that we need may not be there. I think of these constituencies that good friends represent in other parts of this country. If you leave a 220 billion European market and you leave the single market and you leave the customs union, inevitably you will get tariffs. If you have tariffs, that will inevitably affect the manufacturing that is left. That will mean a reduction in jobs in those constituencies, surely. How will that assist? How will that assist our country going forward? And on the government's own estimates, in the northeast of this country, GDP reduction of 11%. In the West Midlands, 8%. In the East Midlands, 8%. This is massive. This is bigger than the 2008 crash. And the truth is, whilst there's been some recovery in London, there has been very little recovery out of London in parts of the Midlands, parts of the North West and parts of the North East. How could we contemplate, seriously, making this worse for those people? When we talk about a trade deal with the United States, I went on an all-party visit to the United States in July. We sat with Republicans and Democrats to talk about the meat of what a trade deal looks like. They were all clear, and so was the TUC body in America. Of course there will be a reduction in labour standards because their labour standards are lower than our own. They were clear about wanting some of our agriculture. They were clear about pharmaceuticals. They were clear about health. They were also raising issues about Hollywood getting its grip on our creative industries. Why would we do that? How will that help our people going forward? So you get tariffs, you get a massive drop in growth, and yet I stand here prepared to vote for this deal on the basis that we put it back to the British people and so they can have the final say. Do they want this deal or do they want to? So I'm prepared, despite the poverty and hardship in my own constituency, to go for this deal, but on one condition. That's how we get this done. That's how we bring our country together. We actually use democracy to say, do you really want this deal? It is the only way forward. The rest is noise, and as weary as we are, I cannot walk through the lobby and knowingly just wave this through with little scrutiny on behalf of my constituents.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, for those of us who felt compelled to vote down the previous withdrawal agreement and deal, I would suggest that this deal has indeed been worth waiting for, and as indicated last week, we'll be supporting it in the lobbies tonight. I think the Prime Minister has proved his critics wrong. The withdrawal agreement has been reopened. The harmful backstop has been removed, and we've secured, I would suggest, a better deal. And all those who previously argued this was not possible should perhaps now reflect. Now, no one is pretending for one moment that this is a perfect deal. There are aspects of the transition period that I do not like as somebody who voted leave. I question an element of the bill. I question the EU's say over our affairs, given that we voted to leave in June 2016. But I also accept that in any negotiation, compromises are required. And although I have qualms, as I say, about the transition period to December 2020, these are manageable. For me, the elephant in the room was always the backstop. It alone could have trapped the UK indefinitely in a structure of the EU's making. It alone could have denied us Brexit. It alone could have denied us the referendum result. And it alone would have made a bad deal, trade deal, or no trade deal at all more likely. That is no longer possible, Mr. Speaker. Now that the previous backstop has been banished, the pressure is on both sides to agree and negotiate a good trade deal. A good trade deal, therefore, is now more likely, not less likely, because the previous backstop has been removed. It takes two to tango. Both sides can now simply walk away, or, in their common interests and given their common starting position, it is far more likely that they will negotiate a good trade deal. And no longer will there be any risk to the entire UK of not being able to benefit from trade deals we might strike with the faster growing economies outside the EU, and meanwhile the Northern Ireland border is kept open. I would suggest to the House that concerns about workers' rights are somewhat misplaced, given the assurances provided by the Prime Minister and the fact that such regulations could only be watered down if Parliament voted to do so. I suggest we should have more confidence in our own ability in this place to decide what is right. And such decisions would now be made here in Westminster, not by remote EU bureaucrats. So I urge all colleagues on both sides of the House to vote for the Prime Minister's deal this evening. It makes a good trade deal more likely, and it keeps the Irish border open whilst ensuring the whole of the UK leaves the customs union. And let's be honest with the people outside this Westminster bubble. It has taken three and a half years to get to this point. We still have not left. It is about time we finally delivered on the referendum result. Let us now heal the wounds in this country and move on.
It's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I will not be voting for this bill this evening because it is nothing more than a charter for a no-deal Brexit. Mr. Speaker, the safeguards which were in the previous withdrawal agreement that the previous Prime Minister had negotiated, which would have ensured that at the end of 2020, the implementation period, that we would not leave without a deal, have now been removed. It is quite clear that the so-called backstop for England, Wales and Scotland has gone. And the reason why so many right honourable members opposite, who opposed the previous Prime Minister's deal on all three occasions that it came into this House, are now so keen to vote for this bill and this agreement is because it precisely will deliver that hard no-deal Brexit which they absolutely believe in and they have done in some cases for decades. The honourable gentleman referred to the backstop having been removed. But the reality and truth is that for Northern Ireland, the backstop, a new backstop, is actually an arrangement which will be there in perpetuity. And as this House knows, the honourable member for East Antrim and I disagree on many things. But on this issue, I think he's a right honourable, on this issue we are absolutely as one. And what really concerns me, Mr. Speaker, is that he has made a speech in which he has made a number of assertions about the implications, not just of the bill, but also of the withdrawal agreement, serious assertions about the impact of it on the Union and in particular, obviously, on Northern Ireland. And honourable and right honourable members opposite sat and shook their heads, and some of them queried and questioned. And what concerns me is that there will be nothing now, because of this terrible programme motion, which will allow anybody or any committee or any other independent organisation even to scrutinise, to question and check whether his assertions are correct or whether they are false. Having read this bill and that protocol twice, I think he's right, and we need to be sure, Mr. Speaker. I'll give way quickly.
Thank the honourable lady. She did refer to me, so I thank her for giving way. Actually, some of us were nodding our head because there were one or two factual issues that we disagree with the right honourable gentleman's statements, but we are happy to pursue that conversation afterwards. What I would say to the Honourable Lady is actually, as somebody who served in the Troubles in the 1980s, the union means a lot to a lot of ex-soldiers on this bench and indeed to members on both sides. We do not take this lightly, I can assure you, but if I genuinely believe this was a threat to the union, I would not be supporting the bill.
Well, I would say to the honourable gentleman, he should listen to those voices from Northern Ireland, and it's not just the DUP, it's not just the Honourable Lady who represents North Down, it is across the community. This is a genuine threat, and it is incredible that members of the Conservative and Unionist Party are prepared to vote through this bill with the attendant protocols, which undoubtedly will mean there will be in perpetuity a separate arrangement for Northern Ireland, because there is nothing in this bill that will allow things to change. Mr. Speaker, what I would also ask this: how much better is our country since the time when we had this referendum? Are we a happier, gentler people? Are friends, families and communities more united? Or are we as divided now in a way that we have never experienced? This bill will do nothing to heal divisions. It will actually increase the divides in our society. That is a concern. And I believe with a passion that not one single promise that was made by the Leave campaign has been fulfilled in any way, shape or form. We were promised a deal before we left. We were promised that Northern Ireland would not be treated any differently, and we were promised that it would keep and preserve the United Kingdom. We were made a promise that we would have the same trading relationship that we currently enjoy as members of the single market and the customs union. And none of those things have been delivered in this bill or any of the attendant documents. Mr. Speaker, I agree with the right honourable gentleman for Tottenham, and he and I disagree on so many things, but on this we two are as one. If this is so good, then it should go back to the people, not by way of a general election, which will solve nothing, like the 2017 general election didn't solve anything. This now needs to go back to the British people by way of... Can I just say, actually, I don't mind losing my job, but I do care about the jobs of my constituents, and I will do the right thing for my constituents, their children and their grandchildren, and their jobs. And that's why this matter must now go back for that people's vote. Now we have the clarity on Brexit, and we see what a disaster it is across the United Kingdom.
Maurice Stewart. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this whole debate, there have essentially, I believe, been two principles. One of them is the principle on how to honour the result of that referendum, and the second is the principle of how to take a deal safely and responsibly through Parliament. And my big beg to the House here, and here I'm speaking to colleagues who voted for Brexit, is let's please, in these very, very final stages, do it properly. Yes. This is your great, great founding moment. Right? This thing is an opportunity for you to create an enormous constitutional change which can last for the next 40 years. So please do it properly. Do it properly through the House of Commons. I know that's a very, very difficult thing to say, but this is possible to do. Possible to do. I could make an argument, Mr. Speaker, about the philosophical principle here, but essentially the reason to do this is a reason of trust. We've heard a lot about trust from Brexiteers today, with every kind of reason. There's every reason for Brexiteers to be enraged. They voted to leave. They didn't leave on the 31st of March. They're in a boiling rage. They were promised to leave on the 31st of October. They want to leave. I get it. But it is also really, really important that we think about the other half of the population. And we have to think about how to do this legitimately. This isn't easy to do, but I promise you, as somebody who voted Remain and has backed a Brexit deal from the moment of that referendum again and again and again and again, right? For no reason at all. I'm not a member of this party anymore. I don't get any bonus points for voting for a second referendum. I literally have nothing to gain from backing this Brexit. I'm backing it for one reason only, which is people voted for it, and I promise to respect the result of that vote. Okay? But in return, people deserve scrutiny. This is a hell of a big document. We cannot pretend that 2.5 days is long enough to scrutinise it. Now, I know there will be many, many voices in the chamber who say we've been talking about this long enough, and that what are we going to scrutinise anyway, and what speeches are we going to hear that we haven't already heard, and anyway the whole place is a talking shop. We cannot think like this. This is our Parliament. We cannot do down our Parliament. This was an exercise, as the Honourable Member for Right Honourable Member for Wokingham has said again and again, in regaining the sovereignty of Parliament. And if it's about regaining the sovereignty of Parliament, then treat Parliament with respect. If we're taking back control from a European court to a British court, treat the British court with respect. If you're taking back control from a European Parliament to a British Parliament, then treat Parliament with respect. If you are taking back control, then show that you are worthy to exercise that control. And all I am asking for is a little patience. 3 days in committee, 3 days in report. You can have it done in the House of Commons by the 31st of October and take it in the Lords. And I promise you, this founding moment for you, instead of being poisoned with the stain of illegitimacy, instead of being associated with bullying